Hello, my name is Abby Kennedy, and today I'm going to be talking about my region, which is St. Lucia, and my poet, Derek Walcott. Here we go. So, some of the history about St. Lucia. No one knows exactly when it was discovered, but it was known as this Luanalau, and also called Island of the Iguanas around 200 AD. The Caribs were a group that came from South America, and they seem to like to be seaward groups, and they migrated north to St. Lucia around 800 AD and continued to inhabit these islands until the Europeans attempted to overtake it multiple times, which we'll go down here and talk about that here with Britain. So the British tried to take over St. Lucia two different times, once in 1605 and once in 1638. Neither time were they successful. The Caribs overtook them and they said, we're getting out of here. So that's what happened there. And then European knowledge and conquest came around the 1500s when there was a need to boost trade. So they wanted to get more resources and get it to places faster. So that's when we had some more people coming to St. Lucia. So we have the Dutch who built this fort, Vix, I don't think I'm saying that right, in early 1500s, and pushed out by the Caribs. They went off and back and forth for a couple of years there, and ultimately they were not successful. But then the French came in with some money and they purchased land from the Caribs in 1651. Well, that upset the British, so they got involved and immediately sent about 1,000 men to overtake the island. After that, these guys, the French and the British, continued fighting for years and years. We'll talk more about that on the next slide here. So they went back and forth 14 different times between France and Britain until 1814, which this was the Treaty of Paris. And at this point, they returned the island of St. Lucia to Britain. It became a crown colony. Now, until this point, though, they had fought back and forth. They had offered different payments and different things there. So it was just complicated and a lot of back and forth for the people living on the island, which made it difficult to know who was in charge, what laws are we following, what customs are appropriate at this time. And so we had this blend between so many different cultures there. We had the Dutch, and we had British and French, and then African also. So in 1979, it was one of the last English colonies to declare its independence. They weren't too excited to get it at the very beginning there. And then again, talking about the blending, we had French, some of the cultural parts of that, the influences. We have the Roman Catholic Church, which you'll see in St. Lucia. The mission schools are still around there, so those are Catholic based. And earlier, I think some of you had seen that I had visited St. Lucia with my husband, and this was one of the places that we went, was the mission school, and we got to see the kids there. It kind of reminded me of maybe like a third world country, kind of smaller school situation, but it was so sweet. But they had, you could see the Catholic influence within it. We've got sculptures of saints throughout the island. They still speak French, Creole today. What's funny is they have steering wheels on the cars on the left side, like the French today have. They've still got French cafes. They have plantations, or they did, of cotton and sugarcane, which originated from the French. Now, there are other different plantations. We had the limes and later on the bananas, but the big ones were the cotton and the sugarcane. The British, then, we've got some small amount though, of Protestant churches on the island. And still today they speak English, so both languages. They drive on the left side of the road, like in England today. We've got the English pubs throughout the island. And then another group of plantations were for coffee, and then the bananas, which I talked about being at a little bit of a later time. And then we have the blending of the African culture. So slaves arrived in St. Lucia in the mid-1700s and brought their cultures with them, their customs, and then so that's just a piece of all of it blended there together. And then slavery, with an A, was emaciated in 1834. Now, at this time, they took account of how many people were working on the plantations. So we had 13,000 who were black slaves, 2,600 which were free black slaves, and 2,300 who were whites. We've got Derek Walcott here. So he was a very famous writer, theater creator, and he explored Caribbean cultural experience, began writing poetry at a young age. He was known for poetry about the Caribbean landscape, and that was honestly one of the things that drew me to him, and how he was so vivid in his imagery and just talking about all the beautiful parts of the island, and just elaborating on that. That's what I was drawn to. Poems also included feelings of personal isolationism and cultural confusion between European and Black culture, which is really neat to read and to catch all the symbolism. He did a really good job with that. Additionally, he produced 30 plays in St. Lucia, and then he went to New York City for a time and studied like theater, and then came back to St. Lucia to create those. And I'm pretty sure he was in other places as well with his theatrical performances. Let's see the years here. So he was born in St. Lucia, January 23rd, 1930, and then died on March 17th of 2017. So here's one of my favorite poems that he wrote. It was Tales of the Islands. I specifically like chapter 1 and reference it in my outline that I've been working on, and within my paper that's going to be coming up here soon. Just like I said, the vivid details, symbolism, personification within even just that tiny little section right here. It's just really cool. So a little bit more about Derek Walcott. Like I said, born in St. Lucia, and that's why I was like, let's focus in on that. Grew up in a small community, so you can sense, that small community feel in some of his writing. Mother ran the local Methodist school in town. So to me, that's showing they have a strong religious background, and she values education because she was the one to start it, and began writing poetry at a very young age. Both grandmothers of his were descendants of slaves. Now, we talked about it was the late 1800s when they they got away from slavery. And so this is a part of his writing and his roots of African culture, going back to that and just thinking about that often. You'll see in his poetry. He studied at St. Mary's College in St. Lucia and then the University of the West Indies in Jamaica, taught at many colleges later in life. Won a Nobel Prize for Literature in 1992, and well-known and beloved poet by so many. Okay, so here's that poem I was talking about, A Far Cry from Africa. The imagery and symbolism is amazing. And I pulled a specific quote piece, I guess, from it. I am poisoned with the blood of both. Well, where shall I turn? Divided to the vein. This is discussing his feelings of like division, where he doesn't know, hey, am I feeling like my roots are based in African culture or from these colonizers, the British, the French, specifically him. I'm feeling like it's more the British side of it. So that was neat. And what effect does this have on the reader? And oh, here's the other one. It kind of cut off there. It was rolled in spray as I strolled down the beach. So that's from Tales of the Island. I thought that was a really good line too. Sorry, back to this. What effect does this have on the reader? Trying to make connections to the pictures like that I'm drawing in my head, which isn't always something that I feel like I do when I read poetry, but he made it easy. So I found that cool. And then 5 senses, I felt like I was thinking about what I'm smelling when I'm there on the beach. Well, the sea water, you know, you can smell that salt kind of. What I'm seeing, what I'm hearing. Sometimes you could even taste that salt. So that's really a unique thing within his poems. Post-colonial themes I wish to study further. I thought, how were the people of St. Lucia affected by the British and French colonizers specifically? Like, maybe what is it that they saw all the time that made them think, well, this is now part of my own cultural heritage. So I'm trying to find some of those within the writing, and it's not that specific, what I've seen so far. So I'm going to try to dig more and see what I can find. Hopefully I'll find something. And then St. Lucia had a tumultuous history as it was overtaken 14 different times. When the French would lose their stronghold against the British or vice versa. What did this do? Like this constant back and forth. What was that like living through, I guess, all of this change? Like that would have to be difficult. How were the British and French cultures blended initially? You know, how that kind of evolved? Were they forced on the local people or just like slowly encouraged, hey, I'm doing this, so you should too? So I didn't know how much push was actually there. It'd be neat to learn more about that if I can find it. We'll see. And was there extreme bitterness from the colonized towards the colonizers? I mean, I'm assuming because the oppressive slave holders and obviously they made many of the people slaves in these plantations, so of course there was bitterness, but I didn't know like what more there was to it. So all of that would be extremely interesting. See, and then we've got references here, which you can see online on the presentation. So thank you. Have a great day.